Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I hope that you had a great weekend. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the chart of Jeffrey Epstein and really bringing you through everything that I see here, all the planetary aspects, what certain things mean. We're really going to break down what kind of a person he is and really get quite psychological. What are the secrets that I see in this chart that no one really knows about? Um, and before I start his chart, I did want to mention, and I didn't want to do a whole video about it. This has to do with my video I did the other day on Lucy Letby. So if you didn't see it, you can of course skip over this. But one thing I forgot to mention, if you did watch that video, was that, so of course I did her transits, her progressions at the time that the murders were committed. And one really key thing that I forgot to mention was that her progressed moon was in Pisces. So, Pisces, of course, is about dissolving boundaries. It's about not really being as rooted in reality. You're telling yourself a story that's not exactly based in reality. So I thought that that was really, really key to, that year period that she was going through in the time that the murders were committed. And if you yourself are going through a tough time right now and it's not really clear as to why, so maybe you're looking at your natal chart, you're looking at the transits, and you're thinking, gosh, I'm not going through any major transits right now, but things just feel really hard. That could be because of your progressions and your progressed moon in particular. So, if you want some help looking up where your progressed moon is at, contact me, let me know. I'm happy to do a reading with you, and I can go through with you where exactly your progressed moon is, what it might be hitting for you right now, and when you should expect that period to be over, because progressed moons do change every couple of years. So I can tell you exactly where your progressed moon is at today and how long it will be before it flips into the next sign. So with that being said, let's get back to Jeffrey Epstein. Um, Now, I did look up a couple of other videos, and I'm not really sure why, but there's videos being done like experimenting with the time that he was born. And I say that I'm not sure why that is because on Astro Theme, if you look it up, he is given an AA rating for this being his verified birth time. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think if it's given an AA, that's like the best you can get. So I believe that means it's 100% legitimate. So I'm going to go with that birth time. It is 6:15 a.m. Birth date is January 20th, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. So for Jeffrey Epstein, the first thing that just pops out to me is he does have this Venus-Mars conjunction. And we've seen this in a couple of the other videos I've done, unsurprisingly. So Venus is about what you want, and then, Mars is about taking action. How are you going to take action to get what you want? So in the context of Venus, basically. So when you have Venus conjunct Mars, there's not much space between your desire for something and then actually taking the next step or action to get what you want. It can be a quite impulsive aspect. So this is quite fitting for him. Now, it's in Pisces, so I know that Venus is exalted in Pisces, but Venus in Pisces can cause trouble in that it can definitely dissolve boundaries. And people with Venus and Pisces tend to get into fantasy mode where things can kind of become more about idealizing what they're wanting or idealizing a partner than actually seeing what's truly there. It's like wearing rose-colored glasses. So dissolving boundaries is obviously exactly what he did. It's interesting that it's intercepted in this chart. What I mean by intercepted is it's a little hard to see here, but the cusp of his second house, which is where these planets are, it starts in Aquarius and then it ends in Aries. So Venus, so the Pisces is kind of sandwiched in between and it's a little bit hidden. Um, so in that case, when you have planets in a sign that are intercepted in a house, what could happen is that the energy of those planets could look a little bit more like what's on the cusp. So that could fit here too, because he obviously had desires that were Aquarius in nature. They were different, they were bizarre, they were out of the ordinary. These planets are in the second house, which I think is really, really significant because the second house is about possessions, resources, and so he wants to own the things that he goes after or the people that he goes after, basically. And the second house is also about income, earnings. And so his second house in Aquarius, it's ruled by Uranus on his descendant. And so his source of income was literally this. It was bringing men and children together, unfortunately. It's that seventh house. Mars and Venus are also making a trine to Uranus. So he is easily able to go after and have desires that are really bizarre, again, that are different, that are not normal. Um, okay. So none of what I said so far is surprising to anyone. The next part surprised me a little bit, only because I don't know much about Jeffrey Epstein. I really only know, of course, what's in the news, the crime he committed. I know that he hung himself in prison, supposedly. So I do know that. But I don't know much about his background. So I found it really interesting that Chiron is on his ascendant in the first house. Um, so whenever I see Chiron in the first house, I think about early wounds connected to one's physical body, perhaps. This is also conjunct Mercury, so that also had me wondering if he has some early wounds around communication, speaking, reading or writing, stuff in school that he had to learn. Maybe there were some challenges there. The Chiron is also in Capricorn. So this leads me to wonder if there was early wounding tied up with his wanting to be a leader, wanting to be in charge. What are his talents? What are his skills? He may really still feel this wound of I'm not enough. And the Uranus, of course, is directly opposing Chiron here. So he's wanting to run from this pain. He's wanting to do something quite radical in order to overcome it. And he's trying to overcome it by using something in his relationships. So he also has his Mercury making a square to Saturn. And by the way, this does look like a T square. But I don't count anything outside of a 7-degree orb as an aspect. So to me, this is not a T square because um, the Neptune's at 23, Uranus is at 15, and so that's 8 degrees. So I'm not going to count it. Some astrologers would, because different astrologers they use different degrees of orbs. I personally go by a 7-degree orb. So he has the Chiron conjunct Mercury, and then it's making a square to Saturn, which gives us even more of a clue as to some type of insecurity around learning, communication. I'm not quite sure. Um, but with the Saturn making a square, there could be, or there could have been some real negative thinking, some real inhibition around communicating, speaking, clearly stating his ideas. And I'm wondering whether this is why he had Ghislaine Maxwell pick the girls and kind of do the grooming on them first. So, unless I'm mistaken, I think she did a lot of the work of going into the community, bringing the girls to him. He did not have as much of an interaction with the girls out in the world. So, I think that might have something to do with this because. Um, a pedophile is, usually very skilled at things like grooming, picking vulnerable targets and then doing the work of grooming them to make them more susceptible to being abused. And I don't feel like he did that. So that could have something to do with the aspects here. What I will say is that with Mercury square Saturn, he could have worked really hard in terms of honing communication skills with when it came to other businessmen because he ultimately had guys with major businesses and PhDs listening to him and respecting him. So if you use a square to your advantage, you can hone in and really try and perfect, you know, in this case, communication skills, but he did it because of this wound. So staying with Mercury for a moment here, I find it interesting that it rules his fifth house. The fifth house is in Gemini, so the fifth house has to do with children, and it also has to do with sex, the pleasure of sex. Um, and so Mercury is also making a square to Neptune, and this is a tighter square. This is at 21, this is at 23, whereas the Saturn's at 27. So the Mercury is making a pretty tight square to that Neptune. So what this tells me is that his thinking can really become fantasy. And also, this is in the house of law, the ninth house. I'm going to get into the conjunction a bit later, but of Saturn and Neptune. But I think with the Mercury square Neptune and the fact that it ruled this fifth house, what I'm thinking is that he probably knew things about the law, but he kind of took advantage of that gray area, that, Neptune, like, the fog, the nebulousness. So also, Libra does rule this Venus and Pisces. So this is someone who could say something to himself like, well, she didn't say she was under 18. So therefore, what I'm not doing anything wrong, right? And that's Neptune. That's all about the story that he's able to tell himself to do what he wants. He has Jupiter in the fourth house, which is really, I think, quite fitting. The fourth house is home. It could also represent family. So he owned a lot of real estate. He had a lot of big homes. Um, he had a lot of people at his estate. So you could argue they were like his family. They were kind of just sprawled out on his island in his homes. And it's in Taurus. So he has a lot of possessions. He has a lot of resources when it comes to home and having homes, owning homes. And then another thing I thought was interesting is that Jupiter is ruling his 12th house. So, of course, one of his homes was an island, which is quite fitting here with the 12th house. He does have his moon in Aries in the third. I think this also helps him a little bit to overcome any insecurities with communication because when you have a planet in fire in a third house, you're going to want to communicate with people. You're definitely not going to be shy. You're going to want to, be a part of the community and be out there. So in general. So this probably does make him good at making connections in the community, despite his any, limitations he has connected to low self-esteem or inhibited speaking. Um, what I am thinking though is that because it's an Aries, his communication style could be quite brief. It's also ruled by Mars and Pisces. So, it's like he's there, he's here and then he's gone. Like he's here in a flash and then he disappears. Um, Again, he also has Uranus in the seventh. So that also makes me think, it's like he could give you a feeling of connection, but he could then flit for one person to the next. So Aries also, it's kind of in these short bursts, and then he's kind of on to the next thing. His sun is at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So I've talked about 0 degree planets before. Um, it's interesting, it's in his first house because, I when you have your sun in your first house, it's like you're unavoidable. You can't hide. You're very, very seen. So it's in Aquarius, so I feel like people see him as very unconventional, bizarre, maybe nerdy, maybe also a genius. So those are the possibilities with Aquarius. Now, this is where things start to get really interesting. His Pluto in Leo owns this sun in Aquarius. Pluto, of course, what is that known for? Power and sex. So he has this sun in the first house and he's known for power and sex. Pluto is interesting here because it is on the cusp of both the eighth and seventh houses. Technically, it's in the seventh house because the eighth house starts at 24 Leo and this is at 22 Leo. Oh, and by the way, 22 is that kill or be killed aspect that I've talked about in my other videos, so that's important to note. But I would argue that the Pluto is in both houses because it is right on that cusp. So I would say he has his Pluto both in the seventh house and in the eighth house. So Pluto in the seventh is really telling for him. When you have Pluto in your seventh house, you tend to attract a lot of powerful people, which is what he did. Um, and then Pluto in the eighth, particularly being in Leo, means that he not only wants complete control when it comes to his sex life, but he wants to be worshipped with all that Leo energy. I'm going to get back to Pluto later here because it makes some really interesting aspects here, and I'm going to get more into that. But I do want to go to Saturn conjunct Neptune in the ninth house because I do think that this is really significant. So we're going through this now, of course, the Saturn conjunct Neptune in Aries right now. It just started, and he has this, so that's interesting because this is again a rare conjunction that takes place I think it's like every 36 years or something. So with Saturn conjunct Neptune in the ninth house in particular, because the ninth house is about, it's a legal house, it's about the law, it's about what's right, what's fair. I see this as him really blurring moral boundaries while maintaining a facade of legitimacy. So he's really able to use the structure of Saturn to kind of hide and shield this illusion. Again, it's in the ninth house, so he's pretty good at leveraging relationships with legal, academic, or international people. And again, I feel like he's able to easily justify the story to himself of what he's doing in kind of a Libra-esque way. So he could say something to himself like, yeah, what I'm doing is illegal, but it's okay because men have needs. So the Libra part of it is he's looking at the other side of the equation and making sense of it being okay and justified and fair. But the logic here is obviously immoral, it's flawed, it doesn't make sense. And that's the Neptune. It's all about this story he's able to tell himself to keep going. So I want to go back to Pluto. Pluto is important here. It's making an inconjunct to Mercury. It's making a pretty tight inconjunct. So whenever you have Pluto involved, especially in an inconjunct, I think, the Pluto will tend to win, or it will win. Um, when we look at a Pluto Mercury aspect, or really any aspect with Pluto, you're going to think about things happening to an extreme. Um, and with Pluto being an inconjunct here with Mercury, there's something extreme going on as it pertains to his communication. So, for instance, I know someone told me like he was discovered to have sent 6,000 emails to one guy, 12,000 emails to another guy. So it's extreme in communication. He also brought in a lot of rich and powerful people in the seventh house. So, it wasn't just one guy, it was a ton of guys. That's extreme also. This also represents, I think, just how much things got out of control. The powerful people brought him more powerful people, and it's really spiraled. So I'm going to go back to Mercury conjunct Chiron and the inconjunct of Pluto. So I did do a bit of research after I wrote these notes because I was curious about whether it's public knowledge that he did suffer from low self-esteem or, something like communication issues as a child. I didn't really find that, but what I did find is that apparently, and some people may know this, I did not know this. Apparently, he suffered from low testosterone levels and he had deformed genitalia. And I think he even had like a micro penis. So this is interesting because Pluto represents genitalia. And it's fascinating. It's making this inconjunct to Mercury, conjunct Chiron, because I feel like he was constantly trying to use sex as power as a way to overcome some kind of wounding. But ultimately, he could only use the sexual activity so far if I mean, I don't know if he could or not, but if he could not have sexual intercourse, for instance. So this is a classic example of an inconjunct, by the way, because it's like you have this fixed idea in your mind that you're going to do something, this is going to go a certain way, or it's going to help you achieve a certain outcome, but it never does. It never goes your way. You're constantly going to have to adjust your expectations. So and an inconjunct is like never ending. It's like you never really learn your lesson. It never really goes away. So this is such a good example of that. It's like, again, he's trying to use sex as power to overcome insecurity, but again, he can only really go so far with it. Um, Pluto is also in conjunct Venus. It's a little wide, so some astrologers, think of inconjuncts really existing mainly within like a 3-degree orb. So, I mean, I still think of this as an inconjunct, but it is a little wide, the Mars Venus. Um, so again, the Pluto, I'm thinking about the fact that it is also in his seventh house. The men come into his house and they're steering at this point. They are the one requesting they're the ones requesting these girls. And I do think this could make him question who really has the power here. Am I the guy with the power? He can't do both because it's an inconjunct. And so I think this could be someone who inwardly struggled with feeling confident about his power. I mean, I think that's actually quite clear. So it's like, sure, he set all this up, but it wouldn't be as successful as it was unless all these powerful people kept it going. The next thing I want to say is this is the second to last thing is that Jupiter is squaring his nodes. And so, what I'm about to say might sound surprising, but I do wonder if, especially in the beginning, um, he found himself at a crossroads with what he was doing. I think that the Jupiter making a square to his nodes made him question, is this right, what I'm doing? Is this moral? Um, Now I think after a while, that inner voice kind of became more of a whisper. And that's because after a while, we get used to our aspects. Um, when he had the Neptune playing such a key role, I do think ultimately he was able to justify his actions so much. But I do think that this meant he was questioning himself quite a bit. The last thing that I think is remarkable is that Saturn is ruling his ascendant, but in terms of the planetary order, it is the last planet. So he evaded responsibility all this time. I mean, one could say that even though he's dead, he's still kind of evading responsibility. There's things that are still coming out that people don't know about. And so I just thought it was worth mentioning because it is the last planet in the planetary order. So it's like he finally got what was coming to him. All of what he did finally caught up with him. The responsibility, because Saturn is all about obligation, responsibility. It finally, accountability. It finally caught up with him, but it took a very long time. So let me know what you guys think of the chart. Let me know if there's any surprises here or this is kind of what you expect. I will say I was thinking he would have more trines in his chart or maybe even a grand trine because this is someone who got away with so much for so long. I mean, that unfortunately you can't deny that he had a lot of opportunity in terms of becoming successful, having a big business, exploiting these females. So, or even males, I don't know if boys were involved, but I mean, I know that, of course, he was very opportunistic and got a lot of chances to do that with the girls. So, I was a little surprised myself that there were not more trines, not a grand trine. I do think this trine is pretty telling, the Mars, Venus, trine Uranus. So this is important, but that's something I was a little surprised at. So let me know what you guys think. I know that a couple of you have wanted me to do the natal chart of Prince Andrew because he's connected to this case. So I am going to do that as well. And I might do some synastry between him and Jeffrey Epstein. That might be interesting. So stay tuned for that. If you have anyone in true crime that you want me to profile, let me know. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. And thank you as always for the support. It means so much to me. Stay tuned for the next video. And as always, thank you so much for watching.